Welcome, everybody from around the world, and appreciate you joining the 8th annual 2021 HITLAB Innovator Summit. And today we're going to open day 3, the final day of this 3-day marathon, with a conversation with Dr. Sarah Chosky, the head of research at HITLAB, and John Hammett, the executive director at the lab, and really get into the premise of the lab itself and the premise of what we're seeing with the adoption of digital health around the world, which is, why is evidence more important than ever today? And why is it, especially during a pandemic and during this new endemic future that we're facing, why is it important that institutions, large purchasers, even small clinics, public health systems nationally, internationally, and investors who are buying in and really leading the way in funding these emerging technologies use evidence as a guidepost for the certainly the design, the development, and ultimately the adoption of digital health technologies. And so we're going to have a conversation about that as a warm-up for today's incredible sessions, including our innovation sessions and our breakthrough challenge, and the famous cocktail hour at the end of the day, which has become an incredible networking session for people that are closing out their days. And so if we could start, Sarah, if you could start, and John, your video is off, I don't know if you know that, but if you could start, Sarah, with just a small background on yourself and your research that you've done over the last 20 years, that would be a nice way to kick things off.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here with you on the 3rd day of our summit. John, I wish I was where you are, because I know that's actually what it looks like where you are. But I'm coming to you from New York. But just a little bit about my background. I'm a sociologist by training, and I've always in some form or fashion worked in healthcare and healthcare delivery specifically. I completed well, I guess I'll start out with my Florida background. I did a master's in public health at the University of South Florida, and then decided I wanted to complete a doctoral degree, and that's when I came from Florida to New York. And so I am a product of the Socio-Medical Sciences program at Columbia, Mailman School of Public Health, which at the time, which was quite a while ago, was a pretty unique opportunity to combine public health with social science. It's much more common now, but when I was first coming to New York 20 years ago, it was a unique program, and really thankful I got an amazing education and experience there, and was working mostly in mental health and mental health services since coming from USF and throughout my time at Columbia. When I graduated, I worked for the New York City Health Department, which at the time was starting a new quality improvement initiative for mental health services. And I was there for a few years, and then went to complete my postdoc in psychiatric epidemiology. So that's all just to say that what I've always sort of straddled this fine line between academia and very applied work. And that's what I bring to HITLAB, and that's what HITLAB does oh so well. Is we bring the rigor of academic research to the real world. And I guess for about the past 7 years, I've been working exclusively in digital health, and which I think in particular is really in need of this type of approach. Because again, we're working in healthcare and healthcare services, and so evidence is crucial. So that's a bit about me. I mean, there's some more in there. I was at HITLAB before, maybe 7 years ago or so, and then went to NYU School of Medicine and was there for almost 4 years. I joined the faculty there, and then about a year and a half ago now, came back to HITLAB in my current role. Again, because I find few other places that do such a good job of mixing in this academic rigor and real world evidence for digital health. So it's great to be with you all. Looking forward to the conversation, Stan. Thanks.
No, thank you for that terrific background, Sarah. And John, you're executive director now of the lab and have been affiliated with the lab for many, many years. If you could also talk a little bit about your background in your history and why evidence, especially in this emerging landscape that we're seeing today, is so important.
Well, thanks, Stan. And for those who are amused about my background, I am not sitting on the beach, but that is certainly where I wish I was. So I'm actually sitting in my office, and this is a Zoom background that I happen to love, so I usually leave it on. There's a couple of important points, and I think, Sarah, you've laid the groundwork very well. The dilemma of healthcare today is all about how do we sort through the noise of opportunity to really find those things that matter when it comes to improving the health of individuals, improving the health of populations, improving the delivery of healthcare, improving the costs of healthcare. And so in a sense, the challenge that we're all faced with is how do we demonstrate that value? And our simple thesis at HITLAB is you prove it. You don't talk about it, you don't speculate about it, you prove it. I actually also have a very personal perspective on that because I was trained as a chemical engineer in my undergraduate days. And one of the first things I remember being taught was if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so measurement, success in engineering, the humorous aside to that is I love studying engineering. I hated doing engineering. And so I went back and got an MBA with a dual concentration in marketing and finance so I could actually become involved in the businesses that used engineering as opposed to having to sit at the bench and do it. But as my career moved forward, I ended up about 30 years ago joining Johnson & Johnson and spent a number of years in very formative roles associated with the development of new medtech products and pharmaceutical products. And as we all know in life sciences, there is a foundational set of processes and mechanisms that take a long time and are very expensive, but that ultimately prove the value proposition of new innovations. Whether it's a drug that starts with it doesn't hurt you to it actually produces an improved outcome in your health is a 5, 8, 10-year journey. It's a shorter journey with medical devices, but it's a similar rigor in that you've got to actually prove the case associated with your innovation. So coming back to HITLAB, what do? We actually help to verify the value propositions of innovations in healthcare, whether it's an application, whether it's a device, whether it's a web-based solution. We believe very strongly that from the thousands and thousands of things that are being invented every day for both investors in healthcare, as well as the potential acquirers of these startup businesses or the people who they serve, they need to have the confidence that this has been proven to be effective as opposed to claimed to be effective. And so HITLAB really focuses very strongly on being able to do quick, rapid verification of efficacy outcomes, if you will, as well as the economic proposition, which says that someone is willing to pay for that innovation and more importantly, deliver it to the people across the world who could take advantage of it. And so I think that in a sense, all we're doing is what science has been doing for as long as it's been recorded, proving a thesis. And we think that healthcare, especially in the world in which technology and healthcare science is converging as strongly as it is, we need a lot more proof and we need a lot more credible proof when it comes to the claims associated with new innovations in healthcare.
Yeah, it's pretty clear, again, just, given the extensive work that you've both done in this area, in this field over your careers, that we're in the middle of a significant uptick in the adoption of digital within healthcare, because of the pandemic and the endemic that we're living in now, the virtualization of healthcare, which, as most people know, when you walk into a physician office, you see fax machines. What do fax machines represent? Analog processes. And so we're seeing now we've seen a rapid adoption of digital health technologies, whether it's remote patient monitoring in homes, whether it's telemedicine, whether it's the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to help drive the efficiencies and whatnot. How has this evidence generation ladder, and we call this the Hanbury ladder at HITLAB, named after Richard Hanbury, who came up with this term that evidence in healthcare is not a bar, it's a ladder. And so ultimately, this Hanbury ladder that we're working on and that everyone works on in terms of proving their overall efficacy across many different levels, which HITLAB obviously studies carefully. How has this really been utilized in maybe talk about some case studies? And again, we'll start with you, Sarah, on how you've seen evidence being generated and how has it changed during the pandemic, and where do you think it's going to go in the future?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me, and just kind of overall, something that I think that's really important to delineate when generating evidence is sort of what stage are we at, either with a new technology or a new product, and I think oftentimes we'll have startups, for example, come to us proposing more of a confirmatory study. More like you are used to reading about that RCT, that randomized controlled trial. We're going to prove, which is great. However, I find many companies sort of need that permission to go back and think, hey, actually, we're in an exploratory phase, or we can do some confirmation, but really we're still exploring the best ways to do things, and that's okay. That's research too, and I think not skipping out on that exploratory phase and really giving it its due attention and rigor, because it is rigor. There's even in that exploratory phase, there's a way to do it. There's a way to approach it that's thoughtful and methodical, and involves hypotheses about the way we think things work. But I think being more mindful of that in building, as you said, that evidence ladder. We're not just talking about the rung at the top. There are all of these little steps, and that's why I'm always a proponent of research in some form or fashion being built into the fabric of a company from the start, and building on evidence, climbing that ladder until you get to those higher rungs. For example, that trial you need to do for FDA, for example. John, I know we've talked about this many times. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
We certainly have, and I think the dilemma is from my perspective twofold. One is the explosion of innovation that's going on across healthcare, and so we've got literally thousands per year of new solutions being brought forward, both hard science solutions associated with biology or pharmacology, or the use of increasing the miniaturized devices that can take actions within the body to bring about improvements, therapeutic improvements. So this explosion of opportunity is creating a cacophony of choice when it comes to saying, how do we bring a new solution to the right place at the right cost? And so that's where the need for proof and evidence comes in. And this is something that a lot of early stage companies, whether they come from early stage ideas, whether they come from within life science companies or come out of an entrepreneur's garage, the dilemma is always, how do I sell my idea with the what I call papacy of proof? And so a lot of people use thought experiments, or they use what I'll call theoretical constructs to describe how what they're doing will bring about a change. Those are all very useful in the world of theoretical physics. You move from thought experiments to mathematical theories to mathematical proofs, but at the end of the day, until you actually do something with a collider or a large-scale experiment to prove what you claim, they're still thought experiments. So we need to bring the same principles to bear much more rigorously within healthcare. And to Sarah's point, it doesn't have to be a 10-year journey like it is for a pharmaceutical product. There are ways in which within the HITLAB, we've been able to very quickly do early stage verification studies with a small sample of subjects and a small measure of outcomes to kind of give confidence to the innovators and, more importantly, the investors in those innovations that it should move forward. And when you look at the marketplace, you find, and IQVIA did this study probably a year and a half ago, they said out of, and I'll make up the numbers, but they're generally correct, out of 1,500 new applications, a handful were clinically investigated. And so here again, we've got lots and lots of digital innovation going to market with claims, but only a small number have been reduced to the rigor of a clinical investigation. And when you take an innovation and you put it in the hands of healthcare providers, or you want to put it in the hands of patients, and you want payers to actually compensate somebody for that, you need to have a body of proof. You need to literally say, yes, using this tool will reduce A1Cs for people suffering with diabetes. Yes, using this tool will reduce the rate of exacerbations for people suffering with COPD. And so at the end of the day, what we have tried to do within HITLAB is make it as easy as possible, but still rigorous when it comes to developing the bodies of proof necessary. And to both Sarah and Stan's example, it is not simply a one and done. It's a ladder or a building of evidence, one step at a time. Start with 6 subjects, go to 10 subjects, go to 50 subjects, go to a large enough trial or a large enough investigation to be able to say, yes, $1 spent on this solution will produce $2 of value to either the patients who use it or the payers who pay for their care. So in a sense, we're just trying to be a very loud voice and a very strong presence in the market that says, let's make sure everybody is proving the value with evidence, and more importantly, credible and reviewable evidence to be able to make the claims associated with all this innovation that's going on.
And that's a great background. And I think, again, the context of the environment that we're in today, you guys, again, obviously being 2 global experts in this area, have just laid that out nicely. And we have, just looking through the attendees that are watching right now from all over the world, we have a bunch of folks from venture capital and from industry, from health plans, certainly pharmaceuticals, and from hospitals. And Sarah, from your perspective, you've worked with executives so much over the last 18 months now, doing rapid tests and really evaluating emerging technologies for them. What are some nuggets of advice that you have for them about, maybe their culture is thick with process, because again, they're working with patients, so they have to mitigate risk all the time, reimbursement risk, regulatory risk. So what kind of advice would you give to them in terms of trying to find ways to take the rapid methodological approach that we have at the lab, where we're doing 30, 60-day studies quickly to find out whether there's signal noise for detection for adoption. But in a culture where people already have full-time jobs, usually 2 or 3 full-time jobs after the Great Recession, everything was piled on to whoever was left standing, kind of thing. What kind of recommendations, what would you tell them to do, and how they should be, really trying to do almost like an early commercial release within their institutions before expanding, and how to really, massage that internally?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I guess I have a couple thoughts, and you hinted at it already. I'm almost always going to say, start small. And I think, as you mentioned, with kind of an early internal release, find a way to try it out on a very small scale. Find a champion or two and play around with it. Make it very low stakes, make it very low burden, or as low burden as possible. I think you're much more likely to see success if you have this, period to play in the sandbox. And you'll uncover all sorts of, small challenges or obstacles or things that weren't thought about that could be really costly and sort of make you end up throwing that baby out with the bathwater before you have it, whereas if you have a chance ahead of time to anticipate these things and think about them and plan for them ahead of time, then when you go to kind of a larger rollout, it will go so much more smoothly, and other stakeholders will perceive that and be much more likely to jump on board and support, further growth of the innovation. So, I think starting small with some champions is hugely important.
And Joe, we've got a few minutes left here, and just to wrap it up, I guess you were the global CIO at Johnson & Johnson for many, many years on the executive committee, the board, et cetera. So when it came to things like electronic data capture, you were the one who was leading the charge to help. And it's interesting, we've had such a highlight of metadata during this conference this year, but you were the one that helped put together the working group and begin the actual process in the early 2000s of getting electronic data capture for clinical trials slowly massaged and slowly socialized around Johnson & Johnson. And that was not an easy challenge. I remember long days, long working group sessions until 11 o'clock at night over the course of many years, 2000 to 2004 or 5. And that was an intense process. So you understand as well as anyone in the world, I think, really what it takes to bring digital technologies, emerging digital. Remember, metadata was emerging back then. FaceForward was the incumbent, and you were the one that was bringing that in there. What do you recommend? We have a number of digital health CEOs that are watching right now. We have a number of venture capital folks who are watching right now. What do you recommend that they do easier for people like you that are in those positions today to help gain adoption within large enterprises like health plans, hospitals, and life science companies?
Well, the simple answer is have evidence. The longer answer associated with the example that you used is that that specific incidence, which is now a very strong historical success, was a combination of the evidence of the value of the solution combined with the political climate within a company, which has got to get adoption agreed to across a number of different interests. And so that's worth a 30-minute lecture on its own, which I'm not going to go into. But back to your question about entrepreneurial CEOs and founders and people who are literally creating and innovating solutions. When you sit across the table from an investor, either the angel level or a Series A level, the investor is looking at you and the idea from 3 or 4 different levels. One, is this somebody I can trust with my money? Do they have the skills? Do they have the passion? Do they have the experience to take this idea and make it real? So number one, it's about the team and about the nature of trust in the team. Secondly, is this a big enough problem that's worth solving? If it's at the margin and if there's 3 other solutions already in play, it's less important than if it's a big solution to an unmet need. Third, and this is not necessarily a priority, or the third question that most investors will look at is, what's the evidence of traction? Is this idea got some evidence that it's verified, that it can actually do what the innovators are claiming they're going to be able to do? Further along, when you're in the Series A, they're going to be looking at evidence of traction as who's actually signed up to pay for it. And so at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to do is make the case for as much as you can afford and as early as you can get evidence as opposed to simply theoretical or projected claims associated with what you believe the invention or innovation will do. Find ways to get the evidence as quickly as possible and as inexpensively as possible, because it's evidence that ultimately builds on itself. And importantly, it's what will large companies look at if they want to embrace the solution. They'll say, what's the evidence that this will make a difference? And for investors, they'll say, what's the evidence that this thing is likely to be successful in the market? And so it's all about evidence. We're in the world that we all live in the secular world, we live in a world where it's all about the economy, or it's all about culture, or it's all about whatever. In the world of healthcare innovation, it's all about the evidence.
Absolutely brilliant as always. Thank you, and John Hammett, for joining us today. And looking forward to seeing you back online at work in about a half an hour. Enjoy yourselves, guys. Have a great day on this day 3 of the HITLAB Summit, and a loud virtual round of applause from our attendees from all over the world.